It sounds like a good deal. The U.S. Army is willing to give up 34 acres of prime real estate in Seattle if the city can come up with a plan that has open space and supportive housing. So what's the problem?
This is not a not in my backyard objection. This is a not in my park objection.
The $90 million plan to redevelop Fort Lawton in Magnolia, right next to Seattle's largest park, will create nearly 240 units of homeless and affordable housing, plus new parks and recreation spaces.
This is really a win-win for the low-income residents and for the city as a whole.
With the affordable housing crisis getting worse in the city, has the time come for the neighborhood to support this controversial proposal?
This is not the last piece of land in Seattle.
Our studio panel weighs in.
What we're trying to do is prevent more folks from getting pushed into the street, pushed out of our city.
Debating the future of Fort Lawton, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. After more than a decade of discussion, the city of Seattle is getting closer to building affordable housing at the old Fort Lawton site outside Discovery Park in the Magnolia neighborhood. The plan includes homes for rent or sale, plus what's called permanent supportive housing for homeless seniors, and more than 21 acres of parks and open space. Supporters of this proposal say developing this surplus Army property will provide some important relief in Seattle's ongoing affordable housing crisis. But critics say Fort Lawton's unique location next to Seattle's largest park make it the wrong choice for this new project, and they're vowing to fight back. Fort Lawton, outside Discovery Park in Magnolia, a staging center and a prisoner of war camp during World War II, and listed for closure in 2005 by the U.S. Army, is a quiet place today, except when people are talking about its future.
We want to hear what you have to say.
I am really excited.
This is not a not in my backyard objection. This is a not in my park objection.
So we are here to have another discussion of the Fort Lawton redevelopment plan.
The city of Seattle began its work to develop this 34-acre site into housing at the Army's request back in 2008. But the recession and legal challenges that forced the city into an extensive environmental review effectively put this project on the shelf. But now, in a region with a rapidly growing affordable housing crisis, the city says it's past time for action.
We've landed on a balanced approach and are moving forward.
Emily Alvarado is the Office of Housing's Manager of Policy and Equitable Development. She says the city's plan for Fort Lawton could have units available by the year 2026. That would include about 85 supportive housing units for homeless seniors, who would be connected to on-site services. Around 100 affordable rental units would be placed here for those making up to 60% of the area median income, and 52 more would be available for ownership for those at the 80% level.
The Army considers this one of their high-value properties.
Along with the housing plan, the city would also allow for 21-plus acres of playfields and open space.
Over 60% of the 34 acres will be for parks and park-related uses. So this is really a win-win for the low-income residents and for the city as a whole.
The city hasn't won anything yet, says Elizabeth Campbell.
We're going to fight to the end on this Fort Lawton situation.
Campbell filed the lawsuit that stalled the city's plans for Fort Lawton more than a decade ago and appealed the city's environmental impact statement in 2017. Last year, a hearing examiner said Seattle's environmental review was adequate. But Campbell says she'll use whatever legal means she can to push Seattle into making all of Fort Lawton into a park.
I think that it's just a misplaced location. The city has had acres of property that they've sat on for at least 2 to 3 decades. So why didn't they build on those?
Our Native community is behind us.
Jenny Miller serves on the board of United Indians of All Tribes, a foundation that's helping develop the homeless and rental housing on the site. She says, with Native Americans and Alaskan Natives becoming homeless at a higher rate than any other ethnicity in King County, providing the 230-plus units planned here will make a difference.
Someone needs to marshal a response to the homeless, crisis that's in Seattle. In whatever little way that we can do that and move that forward, I feel we should work together to do that.
No comments from the orcas, no comments from the seals.
Many who are passionate about the environment say Fort Lawton, just outside Seattle's largest park, is a unique place in more ways than one.
There's something to fight for and protect.
Elaine Chuang is an environmental education volunteer who works at many parks. She says she realizes Seattle needs more housing. But Chuang is concerned few bus lines serve this area, and there are no affordable grocery stores nearby. Plus, she says, the Fort Lawton development could impact an important link for great blue herons and other wildlife, trying to move between Discovery Park and the waters of the Ballard Locks.
In the long run of paving things and turning things into development, anytime we can protect bits that are contiguous to each other, that extend a piece, we're doing a better job for wildlife.
Chuang says regardless of the outcome, the wild creatures who call Fort Lawton home will adapt and survive.
We also want to ensure that this land would not be further upzoned in the future.
I'm concerned about transportation for the new residents of this development.
As for the domestic human population, that remains to be seen. Joining us to discuss this issue, we have with us Councilmember Teresa Mascota. Thank you very much for being here. She's the chair of the Council's Housing Committee. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me back.
And we have Phil Vogelzang. He is president of Friends of Discovery Park. Phil, good to have you too.
Pleasure to be here.
And we have Carol Burton. She is a trustee on the board of the Magnolia Community Council. Carol, good to have you.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Joni Reeves, a Magnolia resident and Green Spaces advocate. Thanks for being here too.
Thanks for having me.
So here we go. I want to begin with thoughts on this broad question of what impact do you think about 238 units of affordable housing and homeless housing at Fort Lawton would have on the city of Seattle? Councilmember Mosqueda.
Well, I'm really excited to be here. We have been working on this for 15 years. As your opening showed, this is an effort to try to make sure that we're addressing the housing crisis in Seattle and doing it in a thoughtful way. We're talking about housing seniors. We're talking about housing vets. We're talking about creating affordable housing for new families who need 3 bedrooms. And we're talking about making sure that we're creating first-time home ownership opportunities for nurses, for teachers in the city. We're talking about working families who've been priced out. The reality is, in our county, of the 62,000 units that have been created in terms of apartments, 85% of them have been luxury apartments. And the consequence of not building enough affordable housing, even moderate income housing, in this city and our region has been that people have been pushed into the street and they've been pushed out of our city. So if we want to think about this through an environmental, green, social justice lens, what we're trying to do is prevent more folks from getting pushed into the street, pushed out of our city. And when they get pushed out of our city, they have to commute 2 hours in. 90 minutes in is the average cost or time for some of our mega commuters. We're the 3rd highest mega commuter city in the country right now. So it is an environmental justice approach to make sure that we're creating additional housing in our city. But when we create additional density, we also know we need to couple that and balance it with greater green space. Well, the project that you just outlined has been talked about over the last 15 years. What we see in front of us is the opportunity to preserve 60% of that Fort Lawton space for a park, green space for all. I live across the way there in Queen Anne. We go over to the park all the time. I like to go to the beach. I like to go running in the neighborhood there, and I know much of our community really uses it as their backyard. This is allowing folks to live in the city in a way to be inclusive of those who've been the most vulnerable in our region and to protect green space.
Thanks for covering all that. Phil, your opening thoughts here. The impact you think this project would have, the city's preferred alternative here, on Discovery Park, Magnolia, the larger city of Seattle.
Friends of Discovery Park certainly understands the need for housing, and we certainly support any efforts that the city can make that will improve the housing stock. I bicycle into work every day. I go down the Burton Trail. I see the camps. I see people living in tough situations. We fully understand and fully support the need for housing, and we surplus federal property is at a premium, and of course this should be a consideration. We also recognize that housing in the park has actually worked well. There are single-family residents in the park up on Officers Row and Montana Circle. I'm here to tell you those people are fabulous stewards of the park. So when people end up living in the park, we see it as a real positive. We see it as a real benefit. It's important to understand, though, that the addition, the words that are used in terms of saying this is addition to the park, from my perspective, I don't see any additional park space. I see a park that is already forested. These are rejiggering of property lines, and that's a good thing. But we ultimately don't see any real addition to the park. We see the Heron Rookery as a critical area that needs to be considered, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a few minutes. We certainly support housing on that parcel in some way, shape, or form. What we are against is the lack of use of other spaces, the parcel south and the parcel north of the housing footprint, that we think can really be reworked to the betterment of the park.
Okay, thanks for that. Carol, your opening thoughts, the impact this proposal could have on the Magnolia community.
Yeah, I've been involved in this for that 15 years. I feel like I've lived half my life, and I'm old.
Yeah.
But I wasn't thrilled with the 2008 plan. I am thrilled with this one because I think it's a great compromise between housing and an open space. Right now, almost all of this parcel is impervious surface. It's buildings, old buildings, falling down buildings, and roads. We're going to get, as Teresa said, 61% of it is open space. You know, an open space doesn't have to be trees. There's a big demand for athletic fields, especially for kids. And between the school situation and the north end, and you know, parks will have a whole process for that. I'd like to see croquet courts, which was in the original Discovery Park master plan. I think that would be great. And I think overall, Magnolia will be fine with it. There is a bus that goes through there which runs the best schedule of the buses on Magnolia. It runs every half hour. It runs earlier in the morning and later at night than the 24 or the 19. There's senior low-income housing 2 blocks away. You know, it's not going to affect property values or anything like that.
All right. It might be a bit of a sticky wicket with that croquet field, but we're going to get back to that.
I'm with Heron Habitat Helpers, so I know about the herons.
Sure.
And we just got an email from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife to say that though they haven't been officially consulted on this, the limit of the director's rule is more than 1,000 feet from the heron colony in Commodore Park. So it's not going to impact the herons like that.
Thank you for bringing that up, and we'll dive into that issue a little bit further too. But Joni, I want to make sure I get your opening thoughts here. The impact you think a project like this would have in your neighborhood, Discovery Park, the green spaces you're advocating for.
I agree. I think anyone who lives in Seattle is well aware of the issues we have with low-income housing, with homeless housing. So I do think it's sad that the city allowed the big developers to pay their way out of having to include low-income housing in a lot of these developments that went up. And now we're in dire straits, to be quite frank. And I think it's short-sighted to take this space. And I want to make sure that we don't miss this opportunity, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand the footprint of this park and regain some of the green canopy that we've been reducing year over year over year. I believe we have other opportunities to build low-income housing. This is not a NIMBY response. This is other opportunities, and that includes land the city already owns. We do not have another place to expand Discovery Park. This is it. Once it's gone, we have nothing else. So I think we're going to miss an opportunity if we don't take it. And I hear that number 60% of open space, and I do feel that's a little misleading because open space is extremely vague. It includes parking lots, it includes walkways, it includes landscape of buildings, it includes the Seattle playfields, the Seattle Public Schools playfields. So open space in the most literal term. It is not green tree canopy. It is not Discovery Park and the gem that we have in that space. So that's my frustration with that number. I think it's very misleading.
Hold on to that thought for one second. I want to make sure that, Teresa, you're able to respond to this, because I think this overall question of why here, you've heard it a number of different times. Why here, why now? You've heard the concerns over the environment, the idea that transit service would need a big boost here. Aren't there other surplus properties in the city that would work out better than Fort Lawton? Your response.
Well, number one, to be really clear about what we mean by open space. When we say 60% of the land is going to be preserved for play fields, green space, for open recreation, The reality is 13 acres are going to be used for passive recreation. That means people walking their dog like the folks that you saw in the opening. It's 6 acres of 2 multi-purpose play fields, and that means making sure that people can have access to the soccer fields that I enjoy playing on, but I'm in a league. There's a lot of people who are prevented from playing on those play fields because they can't afford to play in a league. It's 5 acres of forested land that is incorporated into Discovery Park, and we're making sure that we're maintaining one of those buildings for park maintenance. So that's what we mean when we say green space. Another really good point that was made is we haven't built fast enough. We haven't created opportunities for folks to live in our city. And the reason that we haven't done that fast enough, and part of the reason I think we have a housing crisis, is because we've been prohibited from doing so. There's been a lot of loud voices, there's been lawsuits that have prevented the city from thinking and acting more proactively on rezoning. If we were to incorporate more density throughout our city and couple it with green spaces so that people could have play fields and parks and greenways throughout the city, you would see a city that is more reflective of many of the modern cities in Europe and South America, for example, where people live in dense areas, but they play and interact and have social cohesion in our green spaces. That's, I think, the future that maybe we can all work towards as we think about changing density and zoning in the city. But the reason that we're acting now, instead of looking at other places around the city, is everyone has called on us to be cost efficient. This is zero cost land, and we are acting on surplus land that the Army has said that they no longer need. This is a great example of where the city could have been 15 years ago, but now still be fiscally wise in terms of how we're using very limited access to land. I've also done 2 things in the last year that may help with needing to play catch up. One of the things is, over the years, the city has sold surplus property to plug budget holes. And in doing so, maybe we're not creating enough green space or creating setbacks. What I've asked our city to do is, instead of selling land to the highest bidder or the most wealthy developer, hold on to that public land and build affordable housing coupled with green space, setbacks, green roofs, pea patches, opportunities to have childcare on the first floor. I love talking about childcare. And so that is something that we're trying to do, in addition to saying we have to act quickly with this land that we have, that surplus that the Army is offering. And it cannot just be, I hear the folks in Magnolia, it can't just be absorbed in one area of the city. This truly is something that I'm interested in having a conversation about citywide, so that all of those surplus properties are being incorporated into our effort to create mixed income housing and mixed use housing.
Joni, sorry, I want to make sure, excuse me, Phil.
Show me the green space. There's open space, but as you look at that site from a satellite and you look at the future development, everything is going to remain hardscape. What is forested now is going to stay forested. There are going to be changes in the property lines that I admit will increase technically the amount of Discovery Park. But the actual forested space that is on that property now is not going to increase. There is no net carbon sequestration. There is no net planetary cooling. There is no real addition to Discovery Park. Make no mistake, Discovery Park loses out here. Okay?
Can I just, I want to make sure I put in this piece that Teresa brought up earlier with regard to the cost with which the city is getting this. It's basically nothing, and we're talking about something that can incorporate some green space into projects. That doesn't always happen in the city. You could look at it as a very unique spot from that perspective too. Would you agree?
I don't see playfields as green space. I would argue that the kids who live there, who are going to grow up there, what would they rather have, a ball field or trees that will sequester carbon, cool the planet? Where are we going to be in 100 years?
I think there's a back and forth there. And Joni, a quick point.
I just had a question about the land. We keep hearing it's free, then I hear it's not free. And about cost, I mean, this is completed in 2026 for almost $400,000 per unit. Surely there's land that exists currently that the city owns, also free, that we could build faster and much more cost effective than Discovery Park. $90 million.
There's a lot going into this project. I want to make sure I allow the council member to respond to that.
I agree that we should be looking at every parcel that the city owns that's surplus and creating affordable housing, but it is not an either or. We are making up for the need to fill somewhere between 115,000 affordable units, one estimate to what Microsoft just said, which is 305,000 units of affordable housing that we are missing in our region. We have to look at both and. To answer your question about cost, I want to be super clear about where the dollars come from. When we create 85 supportive, affordable housing units for seniors, for vets who are currently homeless, that land is at zero cost. When we create home ownership opportunities that are creating 52 three-bedroom units, that land is zero cost. And when we allow for 60% of the land to be used for, I would say, open green space or play fields, that land is zero cost. The land that is very low cost, that comes at a very steep discount, is for the 100 1, 2, and 3-bedroom apartments that will be individual family-sized rentals.
Okay.
So the vast majority of the land that we're talking about and the purpose for it is going to be at low cost. That doesn't mean that the city shouldn't move forward with building additional affordable housing, but I want to be very clear about one thing. We do not have the dollars in hand to build as fast as we need to respond to the housing crisis. So I will be doubling down in my effort to make sure that we're building affordable housing and I would say mixed income housing throughout the city on that surplus land. I also think that the commonality that we may have is there needs to be better access to transit in this region, obviously, but across the city. We talk about access 20 to 30 minutes on average in the neighborhood there. I would like to see us double that effort. You know, buses come in my neighborhood during the peak hours about every 15 minutes. That should be something that we offer to the existing neighbors, let alone the ones that are coming. So please hear me when I say it's not just building the housing, it's also looking at what needs to surround that. And that's access to buses. And I would also say making sure that the schools have what they need. I've talked to Eden Mack, who's on the school board. She and I are very interested in working on enhancing access for schools to have the dollars that they need. So yes, there are barriers sometimes that we hear. I think those barriers can be overcome.
I want to make sure that I involve Carol in this conversation here because you've been dealing with this issue for so long and talking with so many people in the Magnolia area. I know you've heard a lot of different opinions about this. Did the city get the right balance, in your opinion, between housing and the environment here?
This time, definitely. Last time, no, but then there was market rate housing because the Army wanted to make money out of it.
Right.
They kind of turned the whole BRAC legislation upside down because that's the last thing.
Right.
So I think this time, yes, I'd like to see more housing and I'd like to see it earlier, but the problem is there's demolition, all of that, there's permits, I mean, you know that. There's all kinds of things that will slow it down.
Right.
I think this is a good compromise,
Okay, and Joni, I wanted to make sure, and I'm sure, Phil, you're going to jump in too here, there is some urgency here with regard to this project because the city's lease with the Army does require the city to submit this application for conveyance, the negotiated sale, by January 1st of next year. So let's say the city does lose its status for some reason as the redevelopment authority here. The Army could choose to sell the property on the private market, and I don't think anybody wants that.
No,
your thoughts with
not.
that piece of it moving forward?
No, I mean, the goal is really to have no development at all. And, you know, the ultimate for me and for those who I speak with is the entire space turns into natural park. Very similar to what it is at Discovery. So while the open space is nice and the housing, you know, I don't agree with that. And I think in this case, I kind of have to dovetail off what something that Councilwoman said. This is an either or. Either we make it part of the park and we expand our green canopy, or we don't. And with housing, there are other opportunities. There is not another opportunity with this park.
Briefly, Phil, and then Carol.
So my question is, isn't the parcel to the south, doesn't that cost money? Doesn't that cost taxpayer money? Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought the Department of Education was going to sell that property to the public schools, the playfields.
Okay.
And so that will be a cost to taxpayers. I think we have to be careful there. This is not free land. I would prefer that south parcel. If we have to build housing there, I would prefer that parcel to become part of the park.
Okay.
The people who live there, who are going to live there, would much rather, I think, have a forest there, have part of the park, be enveloped, be part of Discovery Park. It would be a fabulous place for them to live.
Carol, your
I'd
thoughts?
like to get back to your point because I don't want to see Briarcliff on steroids. I don't want to see wall-to-wall McMansions. The people that are complaining, you're going to have a lot more traffic. You're going to have, and you know, those people aren't riding the buses, so they're not going to push Metro for more service. They're going to be expensive houses. And we're on a deadline here. And the thing is, Parks was offered that land in 2005 because that's one of the first things after the VA took that one building, and that's not going anywhere. Parks was offered it and Parks turned it down because of maintenance. You know, that was probably a bad decision, and I'm not second guessing it now. But they're not going to add it to Discovery Park. That's your reality.
I need to start wrapping up the show because we've covered a lot of good ground here. I'm going to start with Joni and move on down here. This whole thought is the City Council has not held its own public hearings on this issue as of yet. That's going to be happening relatively soon. Your final thoughts for the council as they sort through what's next. If you can keep it brief, that'd be great.
I will do that.
Do your best.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I think this is a huge opportunity for the park to expand, to be on par with some of the country's greatest parks, the Presidio, Garden of the Gods Park, Central Park, Golden Gate Park. I mean, these parks are 1,000+ acres. We have the opportunity not to be 1,000 acres, but to increase our footprint and increase our green canopy. Why wouldn't we? We have land. This is not the last piece of land in Seattle. There are other opportunities and other places in which we can build low-income housing, and I appreciate what the councilwoman is saying, where we can't do it fast enough. I understand, but this can't be the only solution. This is a one or the other. Either we expand our park or we don't, ever.
Carol, the 30-second version, if you can.
30-second. I'd like to see the things that were in the plan held to. Save all the mature trees, save the mature trees, the buffer along 36. You almost have to save the buffer on the north end because it's a critical area and a wetland.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a pressing need for athletic fields.
Phil, your final thoughts, please.
In 1974, Mayor Wes Ullman and council members decided that this was going to become park. They made a commitment that said, and they urged all citizens of Seattle to continue unabated their efforts to acquire for park purposes all lands not required by federal government. This is not happening here, and it's disappointing, and we as supporters of the park see it as a loss.
Okay. Councilmember Mosqueda, I know you're going to be guiding this conversation over the next couple months. You're probably going to hear some more comments like this. How do you want to lead this issue on the council? What timeline are you working with here, too?
So we're going to have at least 2 hearings in our committee, at least 1 hearing in the evening for the community opportunity that has been presented by the Office of Housing to continue. I know a lot of folks have participated in those meetings. I've had the chance to go to Magnolia twice to hear the feedback. We're going to have more opportunities for public hearing. I would say that my values, just so that folks can see that and respond to it, this, as you know, is not the only building that we're trying to move forward on affordable housing. I am absolutely committed to making sure that we're looking at building affordable housing throughout the city and beyond building. Number 2, I think the social justice, the racial justice lens is really important here. The partnership with our Native community and making sure that there is a place for people to have a trusted partner so people get off the street and, more importantly, stay off the street is really critical. Our commitment to our vets and our seniors, for them to be able to have housing so that they're not living in the street. This is a great way to couple housing with case management and housing stability services. Very clearly, we are not paving over paradise. We are creating more opportunities for folks to live in the city, and quite frankly, that reduces commutes for people driving in. That is better for the environment, and it makes sure that more of our green space, our green canopy of actual forest in the outlying areas does not get paved over with additional suburban sprawl. I think that we can find a good harmony moving forward for green space needs and housing, and make sure that our buses and our schools have the funding that they need.
Thank you all for your feedback here, and we will be right back.
I think there's plenty of room in Magnolia for additional homes.
I've got concerns about the doubling the size of my neighborhood.
I think the plan that they've come up with is a good one.
I'm against it 100%.
No matter what decision you make, someone's not going to be happy.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook and Twitter and give us your feedback. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support the city's redevelopment plan for Fort Lawton? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and send us your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next week, job openings at the SPD. Seattle police are the highest paid officers in the state thanks to their latest labor contract. Now, the City Council has approved a signing bonus of up to $15,000 for new recruits and officers who transfer here. Why is this incentive needed, and will it work? We go behind the badge next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.